The National Centers for Disease Control recently labeled the maltreatment of children as a substantial public health problem, with an estimated 905,000 cases in the U.S. in 2006. In California, as recently as 2008, there were more than 700,000 referrals for investigation of child abuse and neglect, involving nearly 500,000 children. These statistics are staggering. Children are our most vital resource, yet we fail to protect them, and child abuse and neglect are increasing at an alarming rate. What can be done? More importantly, what must be done?
In 1874, the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was formed, the first organization of its kind, as a direct result of a legal case in which Mary Ellen Wilson was removed from an abusive foster home. The case was brought, argued, and won by the founder, an investigator, and the attorney for the American Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. But it wasn't until the 1960s that child abuse was formally identified as a social problem with devastating dimensions. California's first child abuse reporting law went into effect in 1963. In 1965, the National Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act became law and provided funds to states that met the law's mandate for reporting child abuse and neglect. By 1967, all 50 states had adopted some form of legislation requiring professionals to report suspected child abuse. Because of this legislation, child abuse reporting laws now provide definitions, procedures, lists of mandated reporters, liability for failure to report, legal protections for reporters. But despite all of the laws, child abuse still occurs.
People need to remember is child abuse has no socioeconomic boundaries, racial boundaries, cultural boundaries. It happens across the board in every neighborhood, in every community.
I think the most important thing is to err on the side of caution with this. We want to be protectors of the children. We don't want to let something go kind of under the radar screen. If we see it, we think the thought, we owe it to the child to get it investigated.
Before we can stop child abuse, we must first identify what child abuse is. Then, armed with this knowledge, we can prevent it. There are different types of child abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect.
Physical abuse is defined as a physical injury which is inflicted by other than accidental means on a child by a parent, caretaker, or other adult. Physical abuse is an intentional assault. Corporal punishment is not in and of itself child abuse, but becomes so if it causes internal or external injuries and/or it's cruel or inhumane.
I mean, if they fall and they've skinned a knee, that's one thing. If they've bumped into a wall or got hit in the head with a locker, maybe I can see something that would say, okay, I can see how that happens. And of course, conversation with the child helps to say, what happened, in a very, very friendly way. But when it looks like strap marks behind the backs of their thighs, or when it looks like there's a purple bruise in the upper arm where it looks like somebody might have grabbed them, and even if I don't do that kind of conjecture and that kind of thinking it through, I just notice that there's this mark on this child's body that is different than just a child falling down and getting hurt.
Research has shown that bruising tends to occur from the back of the neck all the way down to the knees, as opposed to the front of the body, which is where a child would normally hurt themselves.
Injuries to shins, elbows, knees, or forehead are not typically child abuse. But there are some indicators of abuse you should learn to recognize: lacerations, bruises, facial injuries, infected burns, hostile or exaggerated fearfulness, withdrawn, depressed, or apathetic behavior, repetitive rhythmic movements such as rocking, fear of parents or caregivers or of going home, and indiscriminate formation of attachments.
One thing that is a sure giveaway is bruising where there shouldn't be bruising. For instance, there shouldn't be bruising on an infant's upper arms. That indicates a child might have been squeezed or held or shaken. When we pick up an infant, we're usually picking them up lovingly, so there should be no bruising. Or a broken bone in a child that doesn't walk, like a broken leg bone in a child that does not walk. That's a fracture that should not happen.
This type of abuse involves both sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, either inside or outside of the family, including rape, incest, sodomy, oral copulation, penetration of the oral or anal opening by a foreign object, including fingers, child molestation, which can involve inappropriate touching of a child over or under the clothing, or of oneself in the presence of a child. Lewd, lascivious behavior with a child under 14, including touching any part of the child's body. Sexual exploitation has been increasing due to computers and the proliferation and ease of access to sexual material over the internet. Sexting is an example of this type of exploitation. Sexual abuse is the most difficult form of abuse of which to elicit a direct report from a victim due to feelings of guilt and shame. In fact, in cases of sexual abuse, even children who have disclosed their victimization often recant.
There are children that have been subjected to some horrible experiences, especially sexual experiences. And oftentimes these young people are still coming to terms with sexuality and what that means, and knowing full well that something's wrong here. So they feel violated, they feel this is wrong, this is uncomfortable, this is a bad experience. They then do what would be the best thing for them to do, and that is report, to say, this has happened to me. But when they realize that all of these things then go into place, and there are all these different steps and all these different people that are interested and caring about them, but at the same time it's getting quite complicated. And they have to divulge some of this information that's difficult for them. It's sensitive, it's awkward. And I believe too often they'll get to the point that they'll say, you know, it didn't happen, because that's an escape. That's an easy way for them to just step out of this situation and hope that it goes away and apologize for inconveniences and try to get back to what is normal life. And that recanting is a huge problem, because the abuse can continue.
Sexual abuse can involve victims younger than 1 through age 18. Physical indicators can be physical trauma, lesions or irritations in the anal or genitalia area or mouth, swelling or discharge in the genital or anal area, abdominal pain and painful urination or defecation, sexually transmitted diseases, psychosomatic symptoms, difficulty walking or sitting, torn, bloody, or stained underclothing, and inappropriate clothing for the weather or environment. Behavioral indicators may include excessive curiosity about sexual matters or genitalia, advanced sexual behavior for a child's age, compulsive indiscreet masturbation, unusually seductive behavior with classmates or adults, sleep disorders, drastic behavioral changes, speech disorders, inability to concentrate, school problems, including academic performance or behavior, overly compulsive behavior, eating disorders, age-inappropriate behaviors such as bedwetting, thumb-sucking, fecal soiling, and fears and phobias.
Over the years, looking at various studies of the effects of trauma on that child are lifelong, and they really need to be, they're treatable, and people go on to be successful in